The screams from the recording haunted me for months. My brother Matteo had secretly documented the horrors in that monastery before he disappeared. I found his hidden journal and recordings, and in that moment, I knew my life would never be the same again. I grew up in the small town of Valentia, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. My childhood home sat on the outskirts, a modest two-story building with creaking wooden floors and walls that held the whispers of generations. Our family was deeply religious, attending Mass every Sunday at the local parish where Father Dominic delivered sermons about faith and redemption. My parents worked hard, my father as a carpenter and my mother as a nurse at the regional hospital. They believed in the goodness of people and the protection of the church. My brother Matteo was 4 years older than me, brilliant and devout. He had always been the pride of our family, excelling in both academics and spiritual matters. When he announced his intention to join the seminary at 19, our parents could not have been more proud. I was 15 then, and while I admired his conviction, I chose a different path. I pursued journalism, driven by a need to uncover truths and tell stories that mattered. Despite our different callings, Matteo and I remained close, sharing late-night conversations about philosophy, ethics, and the nature of good and evil. The St. Augustine Seminary stood on a hill overlooking our town, a 17th-century stone structure that had been partially renovated over the years. The main building featured Gothic architecture with towering spires and stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns on the stone floors when sunlight streamed through. The seminary grounds included gardens, a small chapel, and administrative buildings. Further from the main complex stood the old monastery, abandoned decades ago and forbidden to students. Local legends spoke of strange rituals and unexplained deaths within its walls. Matteo thrived at the seminary for the first 2 years. His letters home were filled with enthusiasm about theological discussions and the community of like-minded young men. He spoke highly of Rector Salazar, describing him as a brilliant theologian with unconventional but profound insights into spiritual warfare and demonic influences. I visited him monthly, bringing homemade meals from our mother and books he requested. During these visits, I noticed the seminary had an unusual atmosphere, with students speaking in hushed tones when certain faculty members passed by. In his 3rd year, Matteo began to change. His letters became shorter and more cryptic. During my visits, he appeared thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. He spoke of intensive prayer sessions and spiritual tests that lasted deep into the night. When I expressed concern, he assured me these were normal aspects of spiritual formation. I trusted him, but felt uneasy about the pallor of his skin and the nervous glances he cast toward the faculty offices. The old monastery became a frequent topic in his conversations. He mentioned that Rector Salazar had started taking selecti, students there for specialized spiritual training. Matteo considered it an honor to be chosen, though he could not share details of what occurred during these sessions. He only said they were working to combat dark forces that threatened to corrupt the priesthood. I reminded him of the dangerous state of the building, with its crumbling walls and rotting floors, but he dismissed my concerns with unusual irritation. Our parents remained oblivious to these changes, seeing only their son following his divine calling. They dismissed my worries, attributing his altered appearance to the rigors of spiritual study and fasting. My father reminded me that the path to priesthood required sacrifice and discipline. My mother simply added more food to the care packages I delivered, believing nutrition would solve whatever ailed him. I continued my journalism studies at the State University, focusing on investigative reporting. My professors praised my tenacity and attention to detail. I developed skills in research, interviewing, and documentation, unaware of how crucial these abilities would soon become. During this time, I also formed a close friendship with Detective Elena Vasquez, who guest lectured on police procedures. For journalists, she appreciated my questions about investigative ethics and the protection of vulnerable sources. The last time I saw Matteo alive was during the winter break of his 4th year. He had been selected for a special spiritual retreat at the old monastery, along with 4 other seminarians. He seemed simultaneously frightened and excited, speaking rapidly about spiritual warfare and the purification of souls. When I questioned him more deeply, he grew defensive and accused me of lacking faith. Before departing, he pressed a small key into my hand, asking me to keep it safe. He told me it opened a locked drawer in his dormitory desk, but I should only use it if he did not return from the retreat. I laughed nervously at this dramatic statement, but the intensity in his eyes silenced my objections. 2 weeks later, the seminary reported 5 seminarians missing. Rector Salazar claimed they had left on an unauthorized excursion and failed to return. The local police conducted a cursory investigation, finding no evidence of foul play. They concluded the young men had likely abandoned their vocations and left town. Our parents were devastated, but accepted the official explanation, believing Matteo would contact them when ready. I alone refused to believe he would leave without a word, remembering the key and his strange behavior. The seminary declared the matter closed and held a prayer service for the departed students. The town gradually forgot about the missing seminarians, moving on to newer gossip and concerns, but I could not forget. I kept the key in my pocket, running my fingers over its worn edges, knowing it connected me to whatever truth had consumed my brother. Life in Valentia continued its peaceful rhythm, the mystery of the missing seminarians fading into local legend. The seminary enrolled new students, and Rector Salazar continued to be respected for his theological knowledge and spiritual guidance. Yet whenever I returned home from university, I felt a heaviness in the air around the hill where the seminary and abandoned monastery stood. I would stand at my bedroom window, staring at the distant buildings, convinced that secrets lay hidden within those ancient walls, secrets that had taken my brother from me. As months passed, our family adjusted to the absence of Matteo. My mother placed a candle in the window each night, hoping to guide him home. My father buried himself in woodworking, creating intricate pieces that he said helped him feel connected to God and his missing son. I channeled my grief into my studies, graduating with honors and securing an internship at a respected regional newspaper. Yet beneath my professional accomplishments ran a current of determination to discover what had truly happened to Matteo and the others. The key burned in my possession, a constant reminder of unfinished business and unanswered questions. I knew that uncovering the truth might shatter the peace my parents had so painfully constructed, but I could not abandon the promise in my brother's eyes when he entrusted me with his secret. Whatever waited in that locked drawer might destroy the foundations of my faith, my community, and my understanding of human nature. But for Matteo, I would risk it all. 6 months after Matteo disappeared, I returned to Valentia, ostensibly for a brief visit with my parents. The real purpose of my trip remained hidden from them. I intended to use the key Matteo had given me. My arrival coincided with the annual seminary open house, when the institution welcomed the community to tour the grounds and learn about their programs. This provided the perfect opportunity to access the dormitories without raising suspicion. The seminary appeared unchanged, its stone walls standing firm against the passage of time. Students in black cassocks moved through the courtyards, their faces solemn and focused. I joined a tour group led by a first-year seminarian who recited facts about the institution with rehearsed precision. When we reached the residential wing, I slipped away from the group, claiming to need a restroom. Finding Matteo's former room proved challenging. The nameplates had been changed, and a new student occupied his space. I waited until the hallway cleared before approaching an elderly maintenance worker. I explained that I was Mateo Rivera's sister and had come to collect a personal Bible he had left behind. The man regarded me with sad eyes, recognizing my brother's name. He told me that Mateo had been a good young man, always respectful to the staff. He directed me to a storage room where the belongings of departed students were kept until family claimed them. In the dim storage room, I located a box labeled with my brother's name. It contained clothing, books, and personal items, all neatly packed as if awaiting his return. At the bottom lay his desk drawer, removed intact and sealed with seminary. A tape. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the lock, hearing the mechanism click open after months of waiting. Inside the drawer, I found a leather-bound journal and a small digital recorder wrapped in a black clerical shirt. My heart raced as I quickly tucked both items into my bag, replacing the drawer and ensuring everything appeared undisturbed. I slipped out of the storage room and rejoined the tour group, my expression carefully neutral despite the weight of my discovery. That evening, alone in my childhood bedroom, I opened Mateo's journal. His normally neat handwriting grew increasingly erratic across the pages, documenting disturbing events at the seminary. He wrote of Rector Salazar's obsession with demonic possession and his belief that seminarians needed to be tested for spiritual corruption. Mateo described secret gatherings in the old monastery basement, where students were subjected to what Salazar called purification rituals. These involved prolonged isolation, sleep deprivation, and psychological manipulation disguised as spiritual exercises. My hands shook as I read about Mateo's growing concerns. He had initially believed in the rector's teachings, seeing them as challenging but necessary spiritual formation. Gradually, he recognized the abusive nature of these practices. He wrote about a student named Gabriel who had challenged Salazar, questioning the theological basis for his methods. Gabriel disappeared soon after, with the official explanation that he had transferred to another seminary. Mateo no longer believed this convenient story. The journal entries became more disturbing as Mateo documented his discovery of a hidden basement beneath the old monastery. He had followed Salazar one night and witnessed him entering a concealed door behind the crumbling altar. Later, Mateo returned alone and found a series of small cells with reinforced doors. He heard weeping from one of the cells, but fled when he heard footsteps approaching. He believed Gabriel, and possibly others, were being held there against their will. The final entries revealed Mateo's plan to gather evidence. He had hidden the small recorder in various locations to capture conversations between Salazar and his trusted faculty members. He had also begun mapping the basement area, intending to document the layout of the cells. His last entry mentioned that he and 4 other seminarians had been selected for a special retreat at the old monastery. He feared this meant they had fallen under suspicion, but saw it as an opportunity to gather more concrete evidence. He wrote that if anything happened to him, the truth would be found in his recordings and in the monastery basement. With shaking hands, I connected the digital recorder to my laptop. The audio files were dated, beginning 3 months before Mateo's disappearance. The earliest recordings captured mundane seminary life, with prayers and theological discussions. Then came a recording of Rector Salazar speaking to his inner circle of faculty. His voice was low and intense as he discussed the need to identify and isolate seminarians showing signs of spiritual contamination. He spoke of demons infiltrating the priesthood and the necessity of extreme measures to ensure the purity of future priests. Later recordings became increasingly disturbing. I heard Salazar interrogating a student, his questions relentless and accusatory. The student's voice grew weaker and more confused as the session continued. Another recording captured the sounds of someone being dragged across stone floors, punctuated by prayers recited in Latin. Most chilling was an audio file from inside what seemed to be one of the cells, with the sounds of someone sobbing and mumbling incoherently, interrupted by Salazar's voice commanding demons to depart. The final recording made my blood freeze. It captured Mateo and 4 other seminarians being led into the monastery by Salazar. The rector accused them of conspiracy against the seminary and spiritual corruption. He declared they would remain in isolation until they confessed their sins, and the demons were expelled. The students protested their innocence, with Mateo speaking the most forcefully. The recording ended with sounds of struggle and Mateo shouting my name before a loud crash silenced everything. I sat in stunned horror, the evidence of terrible abuse and possible murder playing through my headphones. My brother had uncovered a horrific situation and paid with his freedom, perhaps even his life. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the depth of betrayal. The institution that promised spiritual guidance had instead harbored a dangerous fanatic who used religion to justify imprisonment and torture. The next morning, I forced myself to appear normal during breakfast with my parents. My mother noticed my reddened eyes, but accepted my excuse of seasonal allergies. I asked casual questions about the seminary and whether there had been any news of Mateo. My father shook his head sadly, saying they had come to accept that he had chosen a different path and would return when ready. The trust they still placed in the seminary that had taken their son filled me with both sorrow and rage. After breakfast, I drove to the local police station, asking to speak with Detective Vasquez. She greeted me warmly, remembering me from her guest lectures. Her expression grew serious as I explained why I had come. We placed the journal and recorder on her desk, explaining their contents and my belief that my brother and others were being held prisoner or worse. She listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, Detective Vasquez leaned back in her chair, her face troubled. She told me that she had always found the seminary case suspicious, but had been overruled by her superiors. The church held considerable influence in our small town, and Rector Salazar had powerful connections in the diocesan hierarchy. She admitted that a proper investigation had never been conducted, with the missing persons report closed prematurely. My hope rose as she reviewed Mateo's evidence, but then crashed when she explained the challenges we faced. The recordings, while disturbing, did not conclusively prove imprisonment or harm. The journal contained Mateo's observations, but could be dismissed as the writings of a troubled mind. Most critically, we had no legal right to search the monastery without compelling evidence of a crime. She feared that if we moved too openly, evidence might be destroyed and any remaining victims silenced permanently. I left the police station with mixed emotions. Detective Vasquez had promised to look into the case discreetly, but I understood the institutional barriers she faced. The powerful rarely faced consequences for their actions, especially when those actions were shrouded in religious authority. I realized that justice for Mateo would not come through official channels alone. I would need to find more concrete evidence, perhaps even locate survivors who could testify to what had occurred. That evening, I visited the local library to research the history of the monastery. The building predated the seminary by centuries, originally housing a contemplative order known for its strict ascetic practices. Historical records mentioned extensive underground structures, including crypts and storage chambers. Most intriguingly, I discovered architectural plans from a renovation attempt in the 1960s showing the layout of the basement levels. These plans might help me locate the hidden cells Mateo had described. As I continued my research, I encountered Teresa Mendez, the seminary's former administrative assistant who had retired the previous year. She recognized me as Mateo's sister. and offered her condolences. When I cautiously mentioned my concerns about unusual practices at the seminary, her expression darkened. She confided that she had left her position due to disturbing changes after Salazar became rector. She had witnessed seminarians returning from retreats looking malnourished and disoriented. Financial records showed unusual expenditures for security. Equipment delivered to the old monastery, despite its supposedly abandoned status. Teresa revealed that she had compiled a file of concerning incidents, but had been afraid to come forward. The rector had threatened her when she questioned certain practices, implying her long employment and pension might be at risk. She believed something sinister occurred at the monastery, but felt powerless against the institution. She agreed to provide me with copies of the documents she had saved, including financial records and maintenance requests for the supposedly unused building. Armed with this additional information, I returned to Detective Vasquez. She reviewed Teresa's documents with growing concern, particularly the requisitions for reinforced doors, soundproofing materials, and restraint equipment disguised as meditation supplies. These items corroborated Mateo's journal entries and suggested institutional knowledge of and support for whatever occurred in the monastery. She agreed that we now had sufficient grounds to request a search warrant, but warned that we would face significant resistance. The next day, Vasquez called with disturbing news. Her request for a search warrant had been denied by Judge Morales, a prominent Catholic and seminary benefactor. Furthermore, she had been reassigned to traffic duty and warned to drop her inquiry into the seminary. The chief had received calls from the mayor and bishop expressing concern about unfounded allegations against a respected institution. She apologized for her inability to help further through official channels, but suggested I continue my investigation carefully. She could not act as a police officer, but she would not turn away if I discovered concrete evidence. This setback confirmed my suspicions about the protection surrounding Rector Salazar and his activities. The institutions meant to provide justice had been compromised by religious influence and community politics. My brother and potentially others remained imprisoned or worse, while those responsible continued their lives untroubled by consequences. The depth of this betrayal of trust and abuse of power strengthened my resolve to expose the truth, regardless of the personal cost. That night, I stood at my window looking toward the dark silhouette of the monastery on the hill. Lightning flashed behind it, momentarily illuminating its broken windows and crumbling walls. Within those ruins, terrible things had occurred under the guise of spiritual guidance. My brother had tried to expose the truth and had disappeared for his efforts. Now the responsibility fell to me, not just for Mateo, but for all those who had suffered and might still be suffering within those stone walls. Emotional aftermath. The rejection of the search warrant marked the beginning of my darkest period. I moved through days in a fog of grief and rage, sleeping little and eating less. My parents noticed my deterioration, but attributed it to delayed mourning for Mateo. They suggested I extend my stay in Valencia, believing hometown comfort would heal my spirit. I agreed, but for entirely different reasons, needing proximity to continue my investigation. Each night, I reviewed the evidence, listening repeatedly to the recordings until Mateo's voice and the sounds of suffering were etched into my memory. I spread architectural plans across my bedroom floor, studying possible entry points to the monastery basement. During daylight hours, I drove past the seminary, observing patterns of movement and security measures. I tracked Rector Salazar's routine, noting his regular Thursday visits to the abandoned building, always carrying a black leather bag, and returning hours later looking exhausted but satisfied. The weight of what I had discovered pressed upon me constantly. I experienced nightmares where I heard Mateo calling for help from behind stone walls, his voice growing weaker as I frantically searched for him. I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the boundary between dreams and reality temporarily blurred. These episodes left me more determined but increasingly isolated, unable to share my burden with anyone who might understand. My isolation deepened when I attempted to contact families of the other missing seminarians. Most refused to speak with me, having accepted the official explanation of voluntary departure. One mother broke down crying, telling me to stop dredging up painful memories with conspiracy theories. Only the parents of Carlos Fuentes, another missing seminarian, expressed lingering doubts. They described changes in their son similar to what I had observed in Mateo before his disappearance. However, they feared jeopardizing their standing in the church community by pursuing questions openly. Professionally, my obsession carried consequences. I had requested extended leave from my journalism internship, offering vague explanations about family matters. My supervisor expressed concern about my commitment to the position, warning that my spot might not be held indefinitely. I recognized the risk to my career, but could not focus on anything beyond finding the truth about Mateo. Professional ambitions seemed hollow compared to the possibility that my brother might still be alive and suffering. My parents grew increasingly worried about my behavior. They found me one morning in the kitchen, surrounded by seminary documents and architectural drawings, having worked through the night. My father gently suggested I speak with Father Dominic, our parish priest, about my grief. The irony of seeking comfort from the same institution that had taken my brother was not lost on me. I declined sharply, causing hurt and confusion. My mother later found me crying while holding Mateo's childhood rosary and attempted to comfort me with assurances of God's plan. Her blind faith in the institution that had betrayed us only deepened my sense of isolation. The strain began affecting my physical health. I lost weight, developed persistent headaches, and found myself jumping at unexpected sounds. During a routine visit, our family doctor prescribed sleeping medication and suggested counseling. I accepted the prescription, but ignored the referral, knowing no therapist could help with my unique situation. The pills remained untouched in my drawer, as I feared dulling my senses would compromise my investigation. 1 month into my stay, in Valencia, I reached my lowest point. During a rainstorm, I drove to the perimeter of the monastery grounds, parking where the building was visible through the trees. Lightning illuminated the structure in brief, ghostly flashes. I imagined Mateo and others trapped within, perhaps in underground cells as his journal suggested. The thought of their suffering while the town carried on in ignorance broke something inside me. I screamed until my throat burned, pounding the steering wheel in helpless rage. When the storm subsided, I sat numb and empty, unsure how to proceed against such powerful opposition. That night, returning home drenched and defeated, I found an unmarked envelope that had been slipped under our front door. Inside was a handwritten note from Manuel Ortega, the seminary caretaker. The message was brief but devastating. He wrote that his conscience would no longer allow his silence. He had discovered the secret basement Mateo mentioned and confirmed that seminarians had been kept there. Most disturbingly, he believed at least 2 individuals might still be alive, having heard voices from the deepest section of the catacombs during his maintenance rounds. He requested a meeting the following day at a coffee shop in the neighboring town, away from local gossip. This message transformed my despair into renewed purpose. If survivors existed, rescue became the priority over mere exposure of past crimes. The possibility that Mateo might be one of those still alive ignited hope I had almost extinguished. I slept fitfully that night, planning approaches and questions for the caretaker, determined to extract every useful detail from our meeting. The following morning, I arrived at the cafe an hour early, selecting a corner table with a view of both entrances. Manuel arrived precisely on time, a thin man in his 60s with calloused hands and wary eyes. He ordered coffee, but left it untouched, his fingers nervously shredding a napkin as he spoke in hushed tones. He explained that he had worked at the seminary for 30 years, maintaining the buildings and grounds with quiet dedication. He had noticed changes after Rector Salazar arrived 5 years ago, particularly the renewed interest in the abandoned monastery that had previously been considered unsafe. Manuel had been instructed to clean certain areas of the monastery, but forbidden from entering others. He observed construction materials delivered at night and heard unusual sounds during his work. Initially, he accepted explanations about specialized spiritual training. His suspicions grew when he noticed small amounts of food disappearing from the kitchen stores and requisitioned medical supplies that never reached the seminary infirmary. His breaking point came 3 weeks ago when he accidentally discovered a hidden entrance behind the monastery altar, just as Mateo had described. Following the sound of moaning, he found himself in a corridor of small cells. Most stood empty, but showed signs of recent occupation. In the furthest chamber, accessible through the monastery catacombs, he glimpsed 2 emaciated young men before, fleeing in fear of discovery. He recognized neither face, but felt certain they were among the missing seminarians. Manuel provided a crude map of the basement layout, including the hidden entrance mechanism and the path to the occupied cells. He had not reported his discovery to authorities, fearing Salazar's influence and possible retaliation. He agreed to help me access the monastery during Salazar's upcoming trip to the diocesan headquarters, providing temporary security codes and confirming when the building would be minimally staffed. As our meeting concluded, Manuel gripped my arm with surprising strength. He told me that working at the seminary had been his life, providing for his family and connecting him to his faith. Betraying its secrets felt like betraying part of himself, yet he could not reconcile his religious beliefs with the suffering he had witnessed. He asked if I thought God would forgive his years of unwitting complicity. I had no theological answer, but assured him that helping now mattered more than past silence. Leaving the cafe, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. The confirmation that people remained imprisoned galvanized my determination to act, yet the weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon me. A rescue attempt carried significant risks, both physical and legal. Failure could result in my own imprisonment or worse. Success would explode the carefully maintained fiction surrounding the seminary and devastate the community that had trusted its spiritual leaders. I drove to Detective Vasquez's home that evening, knowing I could not attempt a rescue alone. Though officially removed from the case, she remained my only potential ally with law enforcement training. I showed her Manuel's map and relayed his information about possible survivors. She listened gravely, understanding the implications and risks. After long consideration, she agreed to help, not as a police officer, but as a private citizen concerned about potential crimes. She could not use police resources or authority, but offered her experience and a personal firearm for protection, if necessary. Together, we developed a plan to enter the monastery during Salazar's absence, document the conditions, and if survivors were found, extract them to safety. Vasquez would arrange for a trusted doctor to provide immediate medical care without official documentation. I would use my journalistic connections to ensure the story broke simultaneously across multiple platforms, preventing any single authority from suppressing it. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply and without nightmares. The path forward contained dangers and uncertainties, but passivity had become more painful than action. Whether Mateo was among the survivors or not, exposing the truth and rescuing those still imprisoned would give meaning to his sacrifice. The seminary had betrayed its sacred trust, using faith to conceal abuse of power. I would ensure that light reached even the darkest corners of the monastery basement, regardless of how many respected reputations burned in that illumination. Revenge planning. The 3 days following my meeting with Manuel became a blur of careful preparation. Vasquez and I met daily at an abandoned hunting cabin outside town, away from curious eyes and potential informants. We spread Manuel's hand-drawn map across a wooden table, supplementing it with the architectural plans I had found at the library. Together, these provided a reasonably accurate layout of the monastery basement and catacombs, including the hidden entrance behind the altar and the path to the deepest cells where survivors might be held. Vasquez approached our planning with methodical precision. Drawing from her police training, she identified potential security measures, alternate escape routes, and defensive positions should we encounter resistance. I focused on documentation strategy, preparing multiple recording devices, cameras with night vision capability, and secure storage for the evidence we hoped to collect. We agreed that proof of current imprisonment would be more compelling than historical abuses, allowing less room for institutional denial. Manuel provided critical details about seminary operations during our second meeting. He confirmed that Rector Salazar would attend a 3-day conference at the diocesan headquarters, leaving the following Thursday. During this period, security at the seminary would be reduced to a single guard patrolling the main buildings, with the monastery receiving only routine checks. Manuel would ensure the electronic locks on the monastery exterior doors were temporarily disabled during maintenance, providing us a 30-minute window to enter undetected. Reaching out to my journalism network, I connected with Sofia Diaz, an editor at a national newspaper known for exposing institutional abuses. Without revealing specifics, I explained that I was investigating serious allegations against a religious institution. She agreed to be on standby to publish my findings without delay, regardless of pressure from church authorities or local officials. Her paper had previously withstood legal challenges from powerful organizations and had the resources to defend controversial reporting. The medical aspect of our plan required delicate handling. Vasquez contacted Dr. Maria Reyes, a physician who had previously treated victims of abuse without involving authorities when requested. Dr. Reyes agreed to prepare a private examination room and necessary supplies for potentially malnourished and traumatized patients. She warned that survivors might require specialized psychological care beyond her expertise, but would stabilize their physical condition and document injuries for future legal proceedings. Transportation posed another challenge. We needed a vehicle that could approach the monastery without raising suspicion and later transport survivors to Dr. Reyes without being tracked. Vasquez suggested using her brother's delivery van, normally employed for his furniture restoration business. The vehicle was common in the area, visiting the seminary regularly to maintain antique pieces, and offered sufficient space for multiple passengers. Her brother agreed to lend it without questions, trusting his sister's judgment. Legal preparations became my responsibility. I consulted discreetly with an attorney specializing in human rights violations, describing a hypothetical situation matching our circumstances. She advised documenting everything extensively, obtaining statements from survivors as soon as medically advisable, and filing simultaneous reports with multiple authorities to prevent local suppression. She offered to represent any victims pro bono if the case developed as described. Equipment acquisition fell primarily to Vasquez, who had contacts through her police work. She secured lockpicking tools, communications devices with encrypted channels, and basic restraints in case we encountered hostile seminary personnel. Through her brother, she obtained construction worker uniforms and a magnetic sign for the van, creating the appearance of authorized maintenance personnel. I purchased high-resolution cameras, additional lighting, portable chargers, and medical supplies recommended by Dr. Reyes. Throughout our preparations, I maintained normal appearances at home, joining family meals, and attending a community event. To avoid raising suspicion, this facade grew increasingly difficult to maintain as the operation date approached. My mother noticed my distraction during Sunday dinner, asking directly if something troubled me. I deflected with a partial truth, saying I was considering an investigative piece about missing persons cases, but could not discuss details. She accepted this explanation, proud of my professional dedication despite her worries about my emotional state. 3 nights before our planned entry, I experienced a moment of paralyzing doubt while reviewing the basement maps. The enormity of what we intended struck me fully. We would be breaking numerous laws, trespassing on church property, and potentially confronting dangerous individuals. If we found no survivors or insufficient evidence, we risked prosecution without achieving justice. I called Vasquez in a near panic, questioning whether we should involve federal authorities instead of proceeding alone. Vasquez listened calmly before reminding me of the local connections that had already obstructed official investigation. She recounted cases from her police career where institutional protection had allowed abusers to destroy evidence during delayed investigations. Most convincingly, she asked whether I could live with myself if survivors remained imprisoned while we navigated bureaucratic processes. Her questions centered me, clearing doubts and recommitting me to our original plan. The evening before our operation, I visited my brother's grave, a symbolic marker since his body had never been found. I sat beside the headstone as sunset painted, the cemetery in amber light. I spoke to Mateo as if he could hear, explaining what we had discovered and what we intended to do. I promised that whether he was among the survivors or truly gone, his efforts to expose the truth would not be wasted. The seminary had betrayed its sacred purpose, using faith to conceal cruelty. Those responsible would face justice, and any remaining victims would be freed. That night I prepared the final elements for our operation. I charged all electronic devices, checked camera settings, and packed equipment in a nondescript backpack. I wrote detailed letters to my parents and my newspaper supervisor, explaining my actions and the evidence that had led to them. These would be delivered only if something went wrong, protecting them from complicity while ensuring the investigation would continue in my absence. I placed Mateo's journal and audio recordings in a secure cloud account with instructions for access. Sent to Sofia Diaz on a delayed email, sleep proved impossible as scenarios played through my mind. I visualized the monastery layout, rehearsing our planned route to the deepest cells. I imagined both success and failure, preparation helping manage anxiety about the unknown. By dawn, I had achieved a state of focused calm, my earlier doubts transformed into resolute determination. The seminary had maintained its secrets through the power of silence and institutional protection. We would counter with documentation, exposure, and the undeniable testimony of survivors. At precisely 6 that morning, Vasquez arrived in her brother's van, now bearing the logo of a fictitious maintenance company. She wore workers' coveralls and carried a similar set for me. Her expression reflected my own mixture of tension and determination. As I changed into the disguise, she reviewed our equipment one final time, her methodical approach steadying my nerves. We synchronized our watches, activated our communication devices, and confirmed our encrypted channel functioned properly. Before departing, I took a final moment in my childhood bedroom. I touched the crucifix that had hung above my bed since infancy, considering how this day would transform my relationship with the faith that had shaped my family for generations. The church had provided community and comfort throughout my life, But its institutions had also sheltered evil behind sacred symbols. I prayed briefly, not to the institutional church, but to whatever divine presence might exist beyond human corruption, asking not for success, but for the strength to face whatever truths we discovered. As we drove toward the monastery, morning mist clung to the hillside, partially obscuring the building's decaying grandeur. The symbolism seemed appropriate. For too long, convenient fog had hidden the reality of what occurred within those walls. Today, we would burn away those concealing mists with the harsh light of documentation and witness, whatever awaited us. In the catacombs beneath the monastery, the carefully constructed facade protecting Rector Salazar and the seminary would begin crumbling before sunset. We arrived at the monastery as the morning bell rang from the seminary chapel, its resonant tone marking the start of morning prayers. The sound provided perfect cover as we parked the van behind a groundskeeping shed, hidden from the main seminary buildings. Manuel had texted confirmation that Rector Salazar had departed the previous evening, and the maintenance door would remain unlocked for 30 minutes during system checks. We gathered our equipment, secured communications earpieces, and approached the monastery with the confident stride of workers performing routine tasks. The ancient building loomed before us, its stone exterior weathered by centuries of exposure. Moss covered the lower walls, and several windows remained boarded from previous attempts to prevent unauthorized entry. The heavy wooden door swung open with a prolonged creak when I pushed against it, revealing a dust-filled entrance hall. Weak sunlight filtered through broken stained glass, casting colorful patterns across debris-strewn floors. The air inside felt noticeably colder, carrying the musty scent of prolonged abandonment mingled with something less definable. Following Manuel's instructions, we proceeded directly to the former chapel area. The room retained elements of its sacred purpose, with a damaged altar still positioned at the front and remnants of wooden pews scattered about. Vasquez kept watch while I examined the altar area, looking for the mechanism Manuel had described. Behind the stone altar, partially concealed by fallen decorative panels, I located a small metal plate. Pressing it as instructed caused a section of flooring to shift, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. We activated our flashlights before beginning our descent, the narrow staircase forcing us to proceed single file. The temperature dropped further with each step, the air becoming damp and heavy. The walls transitioned from finished stone to rough-hewn rock, indicating we had entered a section predating the monastery itself. Our lights revealed ancient religious symbols carved into the passage walls, alongside more disturbing modern additions. Someone had painted Latin phrases in red, the words speaking of purification and demonic expulsion. The staircase ended at a heavy wooden door reinforced with modern steel bands, a jarring combination of medieval architecture and contemporary security. The electronic keypad Manuel had mentioned was indeed disabled, its panel dark and unresponsive. The mechanical lock yielded to Vasquez's expertise with surprising ease, suggesting regular use had prevented the mechanism from seizing despite the damp conditions. Beyond this door stretched a corridor lined with small cells, exactly as Mateo had described in his journal. Each cell measured approximately 6 feet by 8 feet, with thick wooden doors featuring small barred openings at eye level. Modern padlocks secured each door, another incongruous mixing of ancient structure and recent modifications. I photographed everything methodically while Vasquez checked each cell for occupants. The first 6 stood empty, but showed clear signs of recent use. Thin mattresses lay on stone platforms with prayer books and water containers suggesting habitation. Within the past weeks, we documented each space thoroughly, capturing images of restraint points installed in the walls and floor. These modern additions contrasted starkly with the centuries-old stone, confirming that someone had deliberately converted these former monks' cells into detention spaces. Most disturbing were the words scratched into the walls by occupants, prayers for deliverance and tallies marking days of confinement. In one cell, a seminarian had carved his name and the message, "I am not possessed, only questioning." The desperation, evident in the jagged lettering, confirmed the psychological torture these young men had endured. Following the corridor deeper into the catacombs, we encountered a larger chamber that appeared to serve as an interrogation room. A wooden chair with restraint straps occupied the center, positioned beneath a powerful light fixture. Recording equipment sat on a nearby table, suggesting Salazar documented his sessions with prisoners. Vasquez discovered a logbook containing dates and names, including Mateo and the other missing seminarians. Entries described purification progress and resistance to treatment, using religious terminology to disguise what was clearly abusive. Interrogation, the final section of the underground complex, required navigating a winding passage through what appeared to be ancient burial chambers. The walls here contained recessed shelves that once held remains of monastery inhabitants. Most stood empty now, their contents removed during previous renovations. The air quality deteriorated as we proceeded, becoming noticeably stale and tinged with the unmistakable scent of human habitation. Vasquez gestured for silence as we approached a heavy door at the passage end, indicating she had heard movement beyond. We paused, listening intently. Faint sounds of breathing and slight movements confirmed someone occupied the space beyond. Vasquez positioned herself strategically before I called out, identifying ourselves as rescuers and asking if anyone could respond. Silence followed. Then a weak voice asked if we were another test. The broken quality of the speech suggested prolonged disuse. I recognized neither the voice nor the name the speaker provided, Thomas Aguilar, but recalled it from the list of missing seminarians. The lock on this final door proved more substantial than previous ones, requiring several minutes of concentrated effort from Vasquez. When the mechanism finally yielded, we entered cautiously, our flashlights illuminating a larger chamber divided into two separate cells. In the first, we found Thomas, his thin frame huddled against the wall, eyes squinting against our lights after prolonged darkness. The second cell contained another young man so emaciated I initially failed to recognize Gabriel Hernandez, the seminarian who had first questioned Salazar according to Mateo's journal. Both men reacted with fear to our presence, having been conditioned to expect further abuse from visitors. I spoke gently, explaining we had discovered Mateo's evidence and come to help. At the mention of my brother's name, Thomas began weeping. Between ragged breaths, he confirmed my worst fears. Mateo and two others had indeed been held here, but had not survived the rector's purification protocols. Thomas had been permitted to help bury them in unmarked graves within the catacombs after signing confessions of demonic influence. We documented the prisoners' condition with photographs and video, capturing their testimony about their experiences. Both described being subjected to extended isolation, sleep deprivation, food restriction, and psychological manipulation, all framed as necessary spiritual cleansing. Salazar had convinced seminary leadership that these extreme measures protected the church from infiltration by corrupting influences. Those who questioned his methods were labeled as demonstrating evidence of possession, creating a circular system where resistance proved guilt. After gathering sufficient documentation, we helped the survivors prepare for movement. Both men could walk with assistance, though Gabriel required more support due to muscle atrophy. We provided clean clothing, water, and simple food from our supplies, cautioning them to consume slowly after prolonged malnutrition. Their profound gratitude manifested in silent tears and trembling hands as they changed from filthy seminary garments into clean clothes. Before leaving the catacombs, I asked Thomas to show us where Mateo had been buried. He led us to a section of the passage where the stone floor had been disturbed and incompletely reset. 3 areas showed signs of excavation and refilling, each approximately body-sized. I knelt beside the grave Thomas identified as containing my brother, placing my hand on the packed earth that separated me from his remains. In that moment, grief threatened to overwhelm my focus on the living survivors who still needed our help. Vasquez gently reminded me that we could return with proper authorities to recover the bodies, but our current priority remained getting Thomas and Gabriel to safety. We photographed the burial sites extensively, ensuring their location was properly documented for future recovery. Thomas provided details of when each death had occurred and the circumstances surrounding them. Mateo had been the last to die, approximately 4 months earlier, after refusing to sign a confession despite extreme deprivation. His final act of resistance had been to tell Thomas about the hidden evidence, though he was unaware I had already discovered it. Our exit from the monastery proved more challenging than entry. Gabriel struggled with the stairs, requiring frequent rests during the ascent. Outside, daylight had begun fading, limiting visibility while potentially exposing our movement to any observers from the seminary. We reached the van without incident, helping the survivors into the concealed rear compartment where emergency medical supplies awaited. Vasquez drove cautiously away from the monastery grounds, avoiding the main road until we reached the highway leading to the neighboring town where Dr. Reyes waited. The doctor had prepared her clinic for after-hours treatment, closing to regular patients and ensuring privacy. She examined Thomas and Gabriel thoroughly, documenting their physical condition with clinical precision. Both showed signs of malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and muscle atrophy consistent with prolonged confinement. Gabriel had developed a respiratory infection requiring immediate treatment. Most concerning were the psychological impacts evident in their responses to simple questions and stimuli, suggesting complex trauma that would require specialized care. While Dr. Reyes attended to the survivors, I contacted Sofia Diaz at the national newspaper. I transmitted our photographic evidence along with preliminary statements from Thomas and Gabriel. The depth of documentation proved compelling, with Sofia confirming her team would begin preparing the story immediately. She promised publication within 24 hours, allowing time for fact-checking while preventing extended delays that might permit intervention from church authorities. Vasquez simultaneously contacted federal law enforcement colleagues, bypassing local jurisdictions that had previously obstructed investigation. She presented evidence of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and potential homicide occurring on church property, crimes falling under federal purview. Her contacts agreed to dispatch agents immediately, ensuring the monastery would be secured before local seminary officials could remove or destroy additional evidence. That night, we relocated Thomas and Gabriel to a safe house Vasquez had arranged. Through her law enforcement network, both men provided detailed statements about their experiences, recording video testimonies that corroborated and expanded upon Mateo's journal entries. They identified other seminary staff who had participated in or known about Salazar's activities, creating a comprehensive picture of institutional complicity. Their accounts revealed that Salazar's methods had evolved over years, beginning with intense psychological manipulation and gradually progressing to physical confinement when less extreme measures proved insufficient for controlling questioning seminarians. By dawn, federal agents had secured the monastery and begun processing the underground chambers as a crime scene. Their preliminary search confirmed everything we had documented and uncovered additional evidence in Salazar's private quarters. At the main seminary building, records indicated his purification protocols had affected numerous students over 5 years, with many leaving the seminary in various states of psychological distress. Most significantly, they found journals detailing Salazar's theological justifications for his actions, revealing a disturbed mind that had twisted religious concepts to serve his need for control and domination. Rector Salazar was arrested upon returning from his conference. The charges including kidnapping, false imprisonment, torture, and homicide. Several seminary faculty members faced charges of complicity and failure to report crimes. The diocese issued immediate statements expressing shock and denial of any knowledge regarding activities at the monastery, a position quickly undermined by financial records showing institutional funding of Salazar's special projects. Sofia's newspaper published their investigation as promised, with accompanying online content, including carefully edited portions of our photographic evidence and video testimonials from the survivors. The story broke across multiple platforms, simultaneously preventing any single authority from suppressing it. Within hours, other news organizations picked up the reporting, amplifying the revelations nationally and internationally. The seminary found itself under intense scrutiny, with protesters gathering at its gates and parents demanding accountability for the treatment of current and former students. 3 days after the rescue, forensic teams recovered 3 bodies from the catacombs, confirming the identities of Mateo and the other missing seminarians through dental records. The medical examiner determined they had died from combinations of malnutrition, untreated infections, and physical trauma consistent with the survivors' accounts of punishment for resistance. These findings eliminated any possibility of dismissing the deaths as natural or accidental, ensuring murder charges would be included in the prosecution. The survivors received comprehensive medical and psychological care at a specialized facility for trauma victims. Their physical recovery began progressing rapidly with proper nutrition and treatment, though doctors warned that psychological healing would require extended therapy. Both men expressed profound gratitude for their rescue and determination to testify against those responsible for their suffering and the deaths of their fellow seminarians. 1 week after our monastery entry, I attended a private viewing of Mateo's remains before his proper burial. Seeing my brother reduced to bones in the medical examiner's facility crystallized both my grief and my resolve. He had died attempting to expose corruption within an institution he had once trusted completely. His efforts had not been in vain. The evidence he gathered had led directly to the rescue of surviving victims and the exposure of systematic abuse. Disguised as spiritual guidance, the seminary that had claimed to prepare young men for lives of service had instead become a place of imprisonment and death under Salazar's twisted leadership. The revenge I had sought was not the violent retribution often portrayed in stories of personal justice. Instead, it came in the form of truth revealed, survivors freed, and systemic corruption exposed to public scrutiny. The powerful institutions that had protected Salazar now faced their own reckoning, forced to acknowledge failures of oversight and complicity through silence. Most importantly, the survivors could begin healing, their stories validated by public acknowledgement of the wrongs committed against them in the name of religious authority. 1 year passed since the monastery revelations changed our town forever. The seminary closed indefinitely following the scandal, its remaining students transferred to other institutions. The diocese established a victim compensation fund after multiple lawsuits emerged from former seminarians subjected to varying degrees of Salazar's purification methods. The old monastery was eventually demolished, the site rededicated as a memorial garden honoring those who suffered within its walls. A simple stone marker bears the names of Mateo and the others who did not survive their imprisonment. Rector Salazar received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole after a trial that exposed the full extent of his crimes. He remained unrepentant throughout the proceedings, maintaining that his actions served a higher purpose in combating spiritual corruption. Psychiatric evaluation diagnosed severe delusional disorder with religious preoccupation, but the court found him legally competent to stand trial. 3 other seminary faculty members received lesser sentences for their roles in enabling and concealing his activities. The judge specifically cited institutional failure when delivering the verdicts, noting that rigid hierarchical structures had created environments where questioning authority became equated with spiritual deficiency. Thomas and Gabriel continued their recovery, making remarkable progress with appropriate care. Thomas eventually resumed his education, though in philosophy rather than religious studies. He began speaking at conferences about recognizing and preventing institutional abuse, using his experience to help others identify warning signs of manipulation in trusted organizations. Gabriel chose a different path, working with a non-profit supporting survivors of psychological trauma. Both maintained contact with me, forming connections based on shared experience and mutual respect. The impact on our community extended far beyond the immediate legal consequences. Many residents struggled to reconcile their faith with the horrors committed in its name. Church attendance declined sharply in the months following the revelations. Some abandoned religious practice entirely, while others sought alternative expressions of spirituality outside traditional institutions. A significant group remained committed to their faith, but became vocal advocates for transparency and accountability within church hierarchies, forming oversight committees and demanding structural reforms. My parents traveled different spiritual journeys in the aftermath. My father initially responded with anger, directing his rage at the individuals who had betrayed his trust rather than at the institution itself. He stopped attending services, temporarily but eventually returned, finding comfort in familiar rituals while maintaining a newfound skepticism toward religious authority figures. My mother experienced a deeper crisis of faith, questioning fundamental beliefs she had never previously examined. She began exploring contemplative practices separate from institutional religion, seeking direct spiritual experience without hierarchical mediation. Professionally, the investigation transformed my career trajectory. The story received national recognition, including a prestigious journalism award for investigative reporting. Job offers arrived from major publications impressed by my persistence and thorough documentation. After careful consideration, I accepted a position with an independent digital platform specializing in investigations of institutional power abuses. This role allowed me to continue exposing situations where vulnerable individuals suffered because of organizational failures and corrupted authority. Detective Vasquez faced initial disciplinary action for operating outside official channels, but was eventually vindicated when the extent of local obstruction became public. She received a commendation from federal authorities for her role in rescuing the survivors and exposing the crimes. The experience prompted her to specialize in investigating religiously affiliated organizations, becoming a valuable resource for similar cases nationwide. We maintained regular contact, collaborating occasionally on investigations where law enforcement and journalism could ethically complement each other. Manuel, the seminary caretaker whose conscience had finally compelled him to act, struggled with guilt over his years of unwitting complicity. He testified extensively during the trials, providing crucial information about the seminary operations and Salazar's activities. After the proceedings concluded, he relocated to another state, seeking a fresh start away from painful memories. Before leaving, he visited Mateo's grave with me, expressing remorse that he had not spoken sooner. I assured him that his eventual courage had saved lives and brought justice, choices that mattered more than previous silence. My relationship with religion evolved into something more complex than simple rejection or acceptance. I could not return to unquestioning faith after witnessing how religious authority had been weaponized against vulnerable seekers. Yet I recognized that the same traditions that Salazar had distorted also contained wisdom about human dignity and justice that had motivated my search for truth. I found myself drawn to progressive religious communities that emphasized ethical action over dogma and maintained healthy skepticism toward institutional power. The most profound personal change came in my relationship with grief and purpose. For months after Matteo's proper burial, I had focused entirely on ensuring justice through the legal proceedings, postponing full emotional processing of his loss. When the trials concluded and public attention shifted elsewhere, the delayed grief arrived with overwhelming force. I finally allowed myself to mourn not just his death, but the suffering that preceded it, the future he would never experience, and the conversations we would never share. During this period of intense grief, I discovered among Matteo's recovered possessions a journal he had kept during his early seminary years, before Salazar's influence darkened his experience. In those pages, he wrote with genuine joy about theological concepts, particularly the notion that uncovering truth served as a form of divine worship. One passage particularly resonated. My brother had written that authentic faith required constant questioning rather than comfortable certainty, and that protecting the vulnerable represented the purest expression of spiritual commitment. These words provided a framework for integrating my experiences into a meaningful narrative. I eventually established a non-profit foundation in Matteo's name, providing scholarships for investigative journalism focused on institutional accountability. The foundation also funded counseling services for survivors of psychological manipulation in religious contexts. This work connected me with others who had experienced similar traumas in different settings, creating a community of survivors and advocates dedicated to preventing future abuses. Through these relationships, I discovered that transforming personal pain into protective action for others offered a path toward healing that neither denied suffering nor remained trapped within it. On the anniversary of the monastery revelations, I visited the memorial garden alone, sitting beside the stone bearing my brother's name. The spring air carried the scent of new growth from plants reclaiming ground, where buildings of confinement once stood. Birds nested in trees surrounding the perimeter, their songs replacing the silence that had previously enveloped the site. Nature itself seemed determined to transform a place of darkness into one of life and renewal. I spoke aloud to Matteo as if he could hear, describing the changes his courage had initiated. I told him about Thomas and Gabriel building new lives, about reforms implemented in seminaries nationwide, about young people questioning authority more confidently within religious institutions. I described how his final act of resistance, refusing to sign a false confession despite knowing he might die, had preserved the truth for eventual discovery. His commitment to integrity, even in extremity, had created ripples of transformation, extending far beyond what he could have imagined. The revenge I had initially sought had evolved into something more meaningful than punishment alone. The exposure of corruption had prevented future victims. The survivors had reclaimed their voices and dignity, and systems that enabled abuse faced ongoing scrutiny and reform. Most personally, I had discovered strengths and purpose I might never have found without the terrible catalyst of my brother's disappearance. The path through grief and rage had led not to mere retribution, but to constructive change and renewed commitment to protecting the vulnerable. As sunset painted the memorial garden in golden light, I placed fresh flowers beside the stone marker. The seminary that had taken my brother no longer stood on the hillside overlooking our town. In its place, difficult questions about institutional responsibility and the nature of true spiritual guidance continued generating necessary discomfort and reassessment. The powerful no longer operated without scrutiny, and those who had suffered in silence found communities willing to hear and believe their experiences. I walked from the garden toward the parking area, pausing for a final glance at the peaceful grounds that had once contained so much hidden suffering. The transformation of this space symbolized the larger changes flowing from exposure and truth. Darkness had not prevailed. Light had entered the monastery's secret chambers, revealing what had been concealed and beginning processes of justice and healing. In this outcome lay the most profound revenge against those who had depended on silence and shadows to maintain their power. Their darkness had been answered not with more darkness, but with the enduring light of truth.